massive thank you to all of you for coming through, despite this corona nightmare. So please, no one cough in anyone's face, that'd be lovely. And I'll try not to spit on any of these guys as I speak.
Appreciate it, man.
So my name's Elias, and I'm the host for this evening. I'll quickly outline a brief context for this event, though Chloe did it so lovely just now. But yeah, so me and my brother, who is just here, have been running the Mandem platform for almost 3 years now, and we've hosted a series of successful events around race, class and gender in London and Bristol. We set the platform up in response to the historically negative portrayals of men of colour in mass media, and the platform is almost like our kind of humble attempt to take back ownership of how society perceives us. Beyond offering a space for men of colour to express themselves creatively, we also invite and encourage all young people to engage in social issues around politics, culture and identity in a bit of a light-hearted way. And yeah, with regard to this event specifically, it's fair to say that recently there's been a lot of kind of ill-informed dialogue around young black men and the kind of attempt to align some of the knife crime in this very city with grime culture, drill culture and music. So we kind of wanted to respond to that in a lot of ways. So yeah, tonight I'm joined by several talented and articulate friends of mine who are all going to share their thoughts on Black British masculinity, mental health and the way that media shapes the behaviours of society, essentially. None of us are experts in this subject matter, so please go easy on us. Vince is maybe a bit more of an expert. But yeah, we'd also love to hear your thoughts as well, so we will have a little bit of time for a Q&A as well. But without further ado, I will let these gentlemen just briefly introduce themselves and just explain a little bit about why this general conversation interests them, and perhaps what Black British masculinity means to you personally. Shall we kick off with Vince, Afro Samurai?
That's what I gotta do. Okay, so introduction, Vince Baidoo, currently running a transmedia organization and a creative technologist individually, so I'm working with technology, trying to get more into the space, get more hands-on with it, and personally exploring why it's taken me so long as an individual to be able to get into it, considering it's such a passion of mine now. In terms of this particular conversation, I can literally go back to the moment where I heard two tunes that I feel saved my life. So that was Brand New Day by Dizzy Rascal and Everything Happens for a Reason by Wiley. So for me, when I heard those tunes at that time, it was made very clear to me that I was a part of something, but that I was allowed to define it. So in Dizzy Rascal's tune, Brand New Day, the chorus is, pay money, pay respect, don't insult my intellect. So that was just clear for me. I felt like I was an intellectual person, and now there was a grime MC saying, don't disrespect my intellect. So I was like, okay, I can take that, times it by X, and do whatever I want with it. And with the Wiley tune, my mum had always told me everything happens for a reason. So when I heard him say that, I kind of got a spiritual context from it. And so I'm not going to make the assumption that all young people are going to be able to filter through the tunes and take the exact same thing that I did from it, but then I also don't feel like the conversation can be swayed too far to the other side and all damaging kind of implications are put on these artists who are just putting forward their truths to whatever degree that they perceive it.
Cool. Mazen, do you want to go next? And can I just say again, massive thank you for stepping in.
No, you're welcome.
Getting here just in the nick of time.
Anytime. Yeah, I was late anyway, so yeah, sorry about that. You know what I mean? Like,
you're forgiven.
Yeah, all right, well, obviously it's always an interesting topic, especially for me. Originally I was brought up in my parents are first generation Sudanese. I'm second generation, but I was brought up and raised in Oxford. So my idea of masculinity was very much based on like that Sudanese cultural idea of being, a strong man who kind of, is a breadwinner and does all of the, the stuff around the house. And whereas, it's a very typical nuclear family type setup. I'm also the youngest, of 4 brothers. So I've always had them to look up to and to kind of base my idea of masculinity on what they thought was cool. Do you know what I mean? And like, they were kind of my male role models, or, you know, people that I was following after. So topic's always interesting for me. Obviously, as I grew up and kind of came out from underneath the wing of like my older brothers and, you know, my dad and stuff, I had to obviously relearn almost an idea what masculinity was to me. And obviously masculinity to everyone, it's probably to every man, woman is different. But yeah, for me personally, it was always an idea that was challenged from, because of where I'm from, because of where my family's from, and definitely because of my family setup. So it's always interesting to delve into the topic.
Cool, thank you. Will?
I'm Will, and it's my birthday. I am as Chloe mentioned, I'm a multidisciplinary artist. I work across audio predominantly, but I'm now diving into tech a little bit more. My work focuses more so on underrepresented narratives, especially in a space of the country, in a region, the Southwest, where narratives and the conversation around underrepresented narratives can be quite contentious, and there's still quite a lot of work to be done there. As for grime and masculinity, wow, where do you start? Similar thing, second gen or first gen immigrant, depending on how you choose to specify the statement. Growing up in this country, I found grime to be an outlet for a whole group of young men who had struggled to understand their place in this space and were perpetually misunderstood. If I'm a like project my own experience onto the music genre, I suppose, and listening to that outlet and its authenticity genuinely gave me something to really hold on to. I was sent to a private school in a town called Horsham at the age of 11, a very middle class, like traditional, like semi-Etonian type private school. And it was just fascinating watching the value of grime in that space. Naturally, a small contingent of non-white pupils, but the cultural capital grime held from just a handful of people was phenomenal. So to have that experience removed from London and to be able to dip back into London every now and again to pick up the experience and its authenticity and then carry it into this completely random space with you, pretty much added another layer to that misunderstanding and finding your surface in a fairly difficult to navigate world at the time.
Cool, thank you, Will. Jordan?
Hey everyone, my name's Jordan Harry. I'm 23 and I'm a memory and speed reading coach, which a lot of you are probably like, get out of here. I look like I should be on Love Island. And yeah, I think I had it yesterday. I had a talk and people are like, oh, you should be on Love Island. I was like, oh, please shut up, right? Now, it's weird how that's an insult now. And so for me, I was always changing the narrative. I grew up in Norfolk, old people and dogs, not much to it. And one of my old white racist teachers said to me I stood out. I knew what he meant by that. And at that young age, I decided to throw myself into education, that being able to articulate myself wasn't something to be ashamed of. You know, being able to read and at an accelerated speed wasn't something to be ashamed of. And as I grew up, I wanted to teach other people. I found other great minds around the world to do that. And so what I am here today about is to kind of show people what makes you different will make you win, and more so the vulnerability. A show of hands, who does mixed martial arts in here?
Does it have to be mixed?
Okay, a martial art. We've got someone back there, got a couple of people. Okay, a handful of people. And so, you know, with martial arts, you realize how vulnerable you are. You know, a lot of men, we're not as effective as we are, or at least what we think we are. And so I fell in love with martial arts when I was younger because it makes you realize, wow, I'm really not ready for what's out there. And that word ready, I knew I'd never be ready. I mean, none of us are ready on this stage. You're either underprepared or overprepared. And so when it comes to masculinity, I'm someone who's really open to being vulnerable because I get punched in the face quite a lot. And not only that, being able to have a passion for something that's quite geeky and try and make that cool. So that's why I'm here. And I'm excited to have a conversation with everyone.
Cool, thank you very much. Lovely introductions. Everyone busting jokes as well. I'm slacking. So I thought the first question that would be nice to ask all of you is, in what ways have depictions of black British men in the media affected the way you think about masculinity? Maybe Vince, you want to kick that off with your media background.
So, can you ask again?
So in what ways have like depictions of black British men in the media via grime music or music in general affected the way that you kind of think about your own masculinity perhaps and masculinity more generally?
Well, I mean, I think for me personally, it kind of goes back to what I said in the introduction, because when I look at how I was thinking at a certain age, when I made the transfer to secondary school, I'd moved from an island called Corsica. So I lived in London, moved to Corsica, then I moved to Bristol, and that was a year and a half before I went to secondary school. So I was in Bristol for not too long and then made another transition where I was in a school where I didn't know anyone. And at that point, I can say that my mind was being morphed by more the American stereotypes of what it meant to be a black male. So I hadn't really started acting out in any way, but I went from that position of being, okay, I've been a new person for a while, I know how to like navigate these things, to realizing, okay, I actually can tell I'm probably going to be here for a while now. I'm actually going to have to cement certain things. I'm going to have to make certain decisions. And because of how I was always quite entrepreneurial, so everything I was doing was always interacting with people. I could see where I was going to have to create certain boundaries and create certain lines that were not to be crossed, and how I was developing those. I think that if it wasn't for grime, could have gone in a very kind of caricatural sort of movie kind of way. So for me individually, yes, the way that the media was portraying black males was definitely having a negative effect. But because my inception was with grime was at its inception, it meant it was at this thing where it wasn't really anything yet. Like, I started listening to grime from the start. So I remember grime where, like, Wifey Rhythm is a grime tune. It's a tune about your wifey, but that was grime. Do you know, there were grime tunes that were computer game remixes. Like, grime wasn't a specific topic of conversation. Grime was effectively a BPM. It was 140. Now, obviously, the MCs that came onto grime all brought their own personal energies onto it. But for me, I felt that I kind of jumped into that, and I think that it would be that possibly some people's issues with grime is that as it solidified, maybe the effects that I was feeling with American hip hop is more what they're feeling is happening in its current state. So yeah, for me individually, I felt like because everything was so new and people were using technology, you know, like if you actually think back to like when it came out, like you couldn't just Google everything at that point. So the fact that people could get their hands on these computer programs, know how to navigate it, know how to master tunes, get tunes onto vinyls, get them into raves, people in the raves know how to operate the desks, all of this kind of technical ability, all of that goes with people transforming themselves. At one point, they don't know how to do this thing. Suddenly, they've got this extra skill. They've got an extra skill, like you're saying, that they can bring from a geeky world into a cool world. As more and more people are doing this, you're seeing more and more people invent themselves. And for me, that gave me the window of, oh, I can just invent myself. And because I grew up without my dad, I already had this conscious thing of, you know, fortunately, my mum didn't bring any negative males around me when I was growing up. So all of the negative effects that I had was more about an absence rather than having negative role models around me. So when there were negative role models around me, I was able to take their positives and just accumulate it with me. But yeah, for me, I was already in a space where I was consciously saying, I've kind of got to invent what this thing called a man is. And so for me, my inception into grime kind of kickstarted that. I'm like, oh, this guy's doing this and this is his thing. Okay, what's my thing going to be? So yeah, in terms of, as soon as it got to that point, for me, then I was very, at that stage, I did Sean Neptali, at 11 years old, I did a course with him, and he really opened my eyes to how media actually works. So I did, it was like, I got to direct a live interview inside of it. It was called At Bristol at the time. It's kind of just one of those cultural centres. And in that, I was just aware at that moment of what media actually is. So at that point, I was always cross-examining and wasn't so easily susceptible. So in that sense, I feel quite lucky in the specific times that I kind of came up within our own like musical explosions of sort.
And do any of the rest of you have any thoughts on how has the kind of sort of hyper-masculine image of black men largely as rappers and stuff kind of affected either like Mazen or Will or Jordan, either of you, any of you personally kind of thing? Or do you think you've been able to navigate the stereotypes a bit?
I think quite definitely I haven't been able to escape the stereotypes. They end up popping up, especially many times when you don't want them to pop up, you know what I mean? When you want to just be seen as a normal guy with a point of view, you're often seen as, you know what I mean, he's aggressive, or, oh, wow, he's so, you know, he's powerful with the way he talks, you know. Sometimes you just want to have a point of view, do you know what I mean, without having, like, any power, any aggression. So, yeah, that's, you know, just a small part of the type of things that we experience. But when you're talking, like, when you bring up, like, grime, you know, like I said, I'm the youngest of four brothers. So, like, my older brother, when he like, come to the country, it was different. It was, like, garage. And it was, like, it wasn't, you know what I mean, like, there was, like, MCs and stuff like that, but that came around kind of later on. Before, it was, like, almost remixes of, like, you know, white girls singing on a tune, like, you know, like, you know what I mean? And it was just sped up a little bit, but it was an expression. It was an art form. It was an expression of black men and women, DJs, MCs, whatnot, around at the time. That developed into grime slowly, and it was an underground movement. So, like, I remember grime when it was coming around, like, people like Big H and, you know what I mean, like JME, when I was seeing these, like, these freestyles, and I was like, wow, this is, you know what I mean, this is almost, you know, it's other people living a similar lifestyle and using that to create this art form that they're expressing, you know, using these videos and these raps to do it. And so when I grew up watching it, I was just like, yeah, like, this is me. Do you know what I mean? Like, this is me. You know, Daniel Bedingfield wasn't really me. Do you know what I mean? But that was me. Do you know what I mean? Like,
Who's Daniel Bedingfield? That went over my head.
Oh, you missed out.
So I'm saying, this the old school bangers. Nah, don't get twisted. He dropped bare bangers. Like,
Yeah, come on.
I'm not the only one that don't know who he is. Right?
Oh, was that serious?
No, I don't know who he is.
That's what I was
She's got a sister called Natasha Bedingfield as well.
Oh, Natasha Bedingfield, I know who she is. Yeah.
Talented family
That's
still.
Daniel would.
Talented family, yeah.
Talented family. Nah, that's what I'm saying. So when I saw that, it spoke to me in a way that other things didn't speak to me. To be honest, I didn't care that much about what they were saying. Do you know what I mean? A lot of them were talking about some things I didn't really understand when I was 10, 11. Do you know what I mean? But yeah, growing up, obviously, yeah, watching that, just seeing black men representing themselves in that way, it made me proud. You know what I mean? Made me feel part of something. So now, like, as of growing up, and like back in the day, it was a really underground movement, as I was saying. So there wasn't many people that knew about it. It was quite like, if you knew, you knew. And then obviously it started kind of growing into, you know, everyday culture kind of thing with the boys. Then suddenly everybody had bars on the playground. You know what I mean? Like all the.
Did you have any?
Of course I did. Of course I did. Plenty of clashes on the playground and, like, you know what I mean? Bare little crowds and, like, oh, jokes. No, like, but this was us growing up. This is our culture. So, like, yeah, it inspired us as little kids to go out there and create our own art. Some of those people that started rapping then still rap till today that I know, and, you know what I mean? They built actual careers. So, like you said, inventing himself in a new space. You know, a lot of black men felt that they had that space to reinvent themselves in. And so now when I'm seeing quite a lot of media coverage, like in the news today about, like, drill music and, like, you know, it's spiking violence, and, you know, in the Daily Mail I'm seeing, you know, people like Homerton B and that, and I'm like, whoa, I'm shocked, to be honest. Like, this was never a thing. Like, this was never part of grime when it started out. Grime was a very underground type of, if you understood type movement. Now suddenly you see a lot of these tabloid newspapers and, even, mainstream media outlets talking about it and trying to understand it from an angle that I don't think they'll probably understand it very well. And that, unfortunately, leads them to make quite rash, like conclusions and base quite rash opinions on those things from a lack of understanding. So, and obviously that comes to bite us in, in the backside. So, yeah, it's not fun, but you kind of just gotta go with the punches, I guess, and use it to your advantage when you can.
Do you feel the same way, Will, Jordan?
So much to unpack. I mean, like, personally, from my experience, like I said, like, I had that duality of being from South London, growing up there. Anyone from South London, like, pre-2010 knows what South London was like. Yeah. Peckham Rye was a very different place. But I think, when I think about grime, I think about an art form born out of frustration. Grime was a natural result of a vacuum, I believe. There was no space for these wordsmiths in garage, and there was no space for these wordsmiths in reality somewhat as well. So they had to make something for themselves. The birth of Esky, madness. Do you know what I mean? And you still hear it. You still hear it today. Like they're like nods to Esky and Hoodies All Summer, which for me is just phenomenal. That kind of like cemented Hoodies All Summer as the album we needed last year. And that whole thing of like performance and hypermasculinity. I mean, being a kid that had this duality, so I'd be stood. So the name of the school, to anyone who doesn't know, is called Christ's Hospital, yeah? Google it, pre the uniform, and imagine me in that, yeah? Because it's a madness. But you can imagine a whole group of like black men between 11 to 16, 17, 18 stood on this like asphalt and just Pied Pipers banging. And it's just Mandem was saying like, I'll do this, I'll do that. But it was because that was the pattern. That was the language that came with the art form. Most of us didn't really live that life. So I bring that in because I'm talking about the hypermasculinity, man. I had a real problem with being a grime MC because I was just like, boy, if I go home, I'm gonna get shown up. I don't do none of that stuff. But boy, I'm so good at talking about it. Do you know what I mean? Yeah. So that was a massive problem because then I had to, immediately you start to build a relationship with gender performance. How much of this man do I have to be? You see what I'm saying? I can't just be the artist. Because grime is so authentic. It's like, it's bread and butter type stuff. Like, people are talking about their day to day, which kind of lends itself to the whole, to drill as well, what's going on now. Exactly. Like, the thing about drill is that their realities are so raw. Like, if you get caught slipping, it is pretty much curtains for you. Do you know what I mean? And can any of us here in this room attest to that type of life? No. See what I'm saying? The thing that upsets me the most about the whole approach from mainstream media is that you've got sports correspondence, you've got political correspondence, you've got US correspondence. They don't have correspondence for stuff going on in our own country, bruh. Someone go into those communities and chat to them and maybe you'd be able to dissect and filter out some of the truth to tell people what's actually going on. You see what I'm saying? And it comes from communication. Like, all of those things that happened in that scenario led to these performances being totally misunderstood for for 2 decades now. Do you see what I'm saying? Even garage to an extent. Garage raves were getting shut down because of the passes that were happening in there. But all people wanted to do was dress in Moschino and listen to Shola Amma. That's all they wanted to do. Do you know what I'm saying?
Facts.
But because there was no one actually jumping in and saying, so what is this about? One for a Friday evening. what's going on? Because you lot look good. Do you know what I'm saying? I think that because there wasn't any real outlet for people to understand the values and the experiences behind the performances, our whole like 2 generations of communication and relationships were lost. And I'm thankful that kind of stuff is beginning to happen, but we are but a few people in the room fighting the mainstream media. So keep at it, man.
And I think as well, like, so, you know, grime music, grime culture, drill culture is also, it's a specific percentage of black males, right? So it doesn't represent, you know, there's a lot of talk nowadays in like discussions around people of color or whatever not being a monolithic group. And that's the thing as well, you know, I think Akala outlined it quite well in an interview he did with Piers Morgan, believe it or not. That, yeah, you know, the crime and the worst of the worst that happens in certain communities is like the tiniest percentage of the wider community, innit? So I think what's also important to acknowledge as well is that just because grime has been fundamental to a lot of our identities and whatever, it doesn't necessarily mean it's fundamental to all black men and their identities. I don't know, Jordan, if you want to jump in a little bit on what some of these lot were saying as well, how you feel about all of that.
I wish I could, but I don't even know some of the artists they're mentioning. But I actually, that was a perfect segue. That was a perfect segue.
Yeah.
You know, being mixed race, believe it or not, I have black and white friends, which sounds like it's mutually exclusive. But you know, growing up around a white household, you know, I didn't have that identity to black culture as I felt like I should. You know, I felt like an imposter. I don't know if anyone can relate in here, but I had that imposter syndrome. Because where the idea is, you know, the black community knows so much more about being black than I do, you know? And so when I grew up, I actually heard about grime from a pig farmer at his house party. Okay? A pig farmer in Norfolk, white boy, army haircut. And I'd never heard of grime at this point. And I must have been 16. You laugh, but it's true. So I walked in his house and I think it was Section Boys upstairs. And it sounded horrendous. It sounded horrible, right? I now love Smoke Boys. You see, Smoke Boys. I'm educated. They're not called Section Boys no more. And so...
I didn't even know that.
There you go! I'm educated now, right? And so for me, what I've loved about that experience was here was this pig farmer relating to Section Boys, right? He's never held a Rambo. He doesn't know what it is to hold him twinning or anything like that. And so for him, though, he had that shared experience of hustle, of coming from a hard place and trying to make it, right? And yet this pig farmer managed to connect with grime artists. And just like you were saying, you know, he hadn't lived their lives. He knew, and he still does know, all the lyrics. And what I loved as an entrepreneur, and that's kind of where I'll come and bring my angle, was people by people. And if you don't believe me, I mean, what I love now, I've just moved to London. Woo! And I feel like I've been welcomed.
It's not.
I'm the only one excited about moving to London.
It's in the celebration, bro. Go back home.
I'm only 2...
You know what I mean?
Go back to the pig farmers, right?
Yeah. Go back.
I'm only 2 weeks in, so I'm sure it'll wear off, right? But where I was going with that was a shared experience. I thought it was only in Norfolk, where I was a minority. And every time I saw someone of color, Indian, Spanish, black, African, Caribbean, you'd always give them a nod in Norfolk. Because it was like, I don't even know why we did it, right? And I know everyone else in here who's an ethnic minority, you know what I'm on about. And when I moved to London, I'm always in and out. It's the exact same. I say good morning, I say afternoon to anyone of color. Which is strange. I grew up in a predominantly white area where everyone says hi to everyone, right? And yet, on the street, there's that shared experience where, arguably, if we saw a black person in a fight with a white person, as a black man, I'd be on the black person's side, instantaneously. It's crazy how we've got that cognitive bias. It's okay having these cognitive biases, but we need to acknowledge they're there. So I acknowledge that I have a prejudice, that if I see two people of two different races, I will favor the person who has that shared experience. As long as I check that, I make sure I don't act upon that in that impulse, that's okay. And so what I found with grime was it brought that shared experience, that head nod on the street. And just the way you guys are speaking about it so passionately I wish I could connect, but I don't have that shared experience, that level. And that's what I loved about Grime was, although I was in Norfolk, I didn't feel alone. That's the crazy thing. And now I'm in London for 2 weeks so far, and I'm loving it. I'm now seeing how Grime is bringing different cultures together. When I, just like my pig farmer boy, when I meet someone who I'm like, whoa, you listen to Grime? It's an instant connection, just like that head nod on the street. So that's what I love about Grime, is it's now starting to bring people together.
Yeah, go for it.
So the one thing that I just wanted to add in there, so just as like a little disclaimer, though I don't listen to drill, like I rate everyone who's doing their thing, anybody who can take their experience and be able to transform it. In terms of the beats, I quite like the beats and all of that stuff as well. But I think that one thing that is important to emphasize based on what you were saying about that it's not everyone's shared experience. So like you, everyone I knew had bars. You had to do that kind of thing. And so when I was first writing my bars, I was writing things that were not true. But even as I was reading it back to myself, I felt uncomfortable. I'm like, I'm not going to perform this. There's something in here that's jarring. And what kind of came to my head was, I don't hate my neighbors. Like the way that I've gone through my ends, I haven't been bullied like that in that way. So I don't want to stab everyone. I don't want to shoot everyone. Yeah. Now, the thing is you mentioned authenticity, but the realism is when you actually speak to people who know these grime MCs, a lot of them are talking shit.
A lot of them.
And that's but then that's the actual connection though, is that when you actually realize that these same people are not always about exactly what they say, that's when it does then bring it back to that shared experience. That it actually is just people in the exact same environments as you, choosing to communicate in a way that everybody takes for a standard with somebody who say like Tupac. Do you know what I mean? Obviously he ended up morphing into the role, but he was actually a ballerina who could just articulate himself and take everybody else's stories and then morph it into a certain way. And the reason why I just wanted to bring that up is because very recently we've had this situation within Grime. We had Stormzy, Wiley, Dot Rotten, J1, all of those kind of things. And there's been separation that's kind of been made inside of it, where you've got the drill people calling the Grime lot Niki. And the way that it's happening is in a derogatory way. And I just found that it's a shame because that quote-unquote Nikiness that they're calling them out for is what I was saying before, that these people were just sick at technology. They were just sick with sounds and all of that kind of thing. So I think the reason why Grime was so universal as opposed to just UK urban music is because it did genuinely come from people like us. These people were not all out on road, moving boxes and boxes, shooting everyone they see, stabbing. No matter what they said, they weren't. They were actually more like us. So whether it was because they were the ones making the beats, maybe whether because it was them who were the DJs making the selectors, or the ones who decided to take what they see and put it into a first person point of view narrative, they were actually like the majority of black people, being that they were in these environments seeing the same view. So I just wanted to put that in there because there is definitely something about it that is very authentic, which is why I'm so passionate about it. But I also feel like there's a level of fictional narrative that actually makes the difference between the grime and the drill. Why, again, I wouldn't want to vilify the drill lot, but there is something a little bit more incriminating at minimal. Do you know what I mean? In terms of people saying things on tracks and then it being able to be used as actual evidence in court cases where they could pull up the files and match the track to...
How do they get away with that?
They don't.
Yeah, I know Unknown T's just come back out.
Yeah.
Praise the Lord. Praise the Lord. We let
Praise
him
the
out.
Lord for Unknown T.
No, I was literally just on my way here. I was listening to his new tune. My boy Lee
Fresh out, yeah?
Fresh Home.
Yeah, Fresh Home.
It's a banger still. I can't lie. But
Even then, he
so I'm
doesn't
saying,
care.
I was listening to it.
Who's heard it, by the way, real quick?
Fresh Home.
Fresh Home. Okay, so we might have to explain a little bit more.
Basically, okay, cool. So it's Fresh Home. The term obviously means it's commonly thrown about when you come out of prison. So yeah, like he just come out of prison. He was in prison for murder and he just basically beat the case. So he just come out and dropped this tune, Fresh Home. And yeah, but like you're saying, like when you're listening to the song, you're like, you know, you're bopping along to it. Like I was like, yeah, Fresh Home, you know what I mean? Like I just came out of prison. I've never been to prison. But I was excited, like I just came out, do you know what I mean?
I was ready to go back to prison. I was ready to go back.
And there's a lot of lyrics.
I'm busy
yeah.
with my
So like, no, it gets like that. There's a lot of lyrics. I like that.
Yeah.
But yeah, I just wanted to pick up on the head nod, that black man head nod. Like that say, it's like a universal black person head nod, right? And I love it. It's amazing, right? But like when I was younger, it was a little bit different, right? So, like I've said before, I've come across as maybe an aggressive-looking person, or I don't know. Do you know what I mean? It happens, but
It's the beard, man. It's the beard.
it's probably the beard. But yeah. Anyway,
We could grow.
so like, yeah. Sorry, I was saying the head nod. If for example I'm looking at someone, another black person, it sort of goes back to the hyper masculinity and that idea of who's the biggest dog, who's the biggest man. If you're looking at someone for long enough, you won't get the head nod. You'll get, yo, what are you looking at? You know what I mean? And it's funny, but I've seen many, many fights, physical altercations, people almost getting stabbed just for that. Just for, yo, what are you looking at? And that escalates to, I can look at whoever I want to, and then before you know it, there's hands being thrown, people maybe being stabbed, do you know what I mean? And that also comes from that same idea of the hyper masculinity that maybe the music that we listen to or the culture that we associate ourselves with portrays. But I think it's all down to us. Like, I keep saying, like, I say this every year, 2020 is the year of the black man head nod, right? But I said it in 2019, 2018, I will say it in 2021 too. And what I want to emphasize by that is, honestly, you can just change your perception, change your perception of hyper masculinity, and instead of being like, I'm the biggest dog, just, yo, what are you saying, bro, you good? And I guarantee you, 10 times out of 10, the other black male will be like, yeah, I'm good, and you'll strike a conversation, and you might actually, build a connection or build a bond. And trust me, I've tried it myself plenty of times, and it always works. It always works. But then at the same time, I guarantee you, 9 times out of 10, if you say what when someone's been looking at you for a while, that will also turn into some sort of altercation. So it depends how you want to go with it. So yeah, 2020, the head nod.
So you lot all you said real interesting things there. And I think what's really interesting about what you said, Jordan, and how grime culture's actually done a lot to unify young people. I think it's really interesting having me and you, Mazen, us growing up through grime not being as popular amongst everyone and not being as mainstream a thing, and now it's such a mainstream thing. I do feel like there is a lot of positivity there in terms of feeling more accepted by wider society, albeit through a particular lens of performed black masculinity. But I think what would be interesting as well to dissect now is a little bit about, to what extent do you think the responsibility falls on us, as you said, Will, that kind of cultural capital that a lot of black British men hold in terms of grime. To what extent does the responsibility fall on us to kind of address some of the kind of more violent and misogynistic elements of grime? Or, as in a previous event we did with Loki, which was really interesting, was he outlined that you very rarely hear any criticism of the companies who distribute the music, so at the corporate level. So what are your kind of thoughts on that, if any?
What are you saying, Mark?
So it's forgive me if I misunderstood, but we're talking about accountability, and our responsibility to address some of the issues or the pitfalls that come with the culture, I suppose. I think, I'm from a school of thought where, as an artist, you have a responsibility to ensure that whatever you're putting out begins a conversation, and it's difficult because so many of these people, I presume, will be speaking their realities that, unfortunately, because of just how messed up patriarchy is and how it gets understood and applied within different cultures, that those elements of gender performance are in fact their reality as well. One of the things I really, really appreciate is listening to grime or music or any type of music that comes from that space that reflects any sort of male vulnerability, as Jordan referred to earlier. I remember listening to Half Cast podcast last summer, and Chucky and them man were chatting about Skepta's album, and I heard it there for the first time, but people were just like, he just needs to get over his ex, man, because a lot of the stuff he spoke about in that album was like all framed around like the birth of his daughter and the breakdown of numerous relationships given his social context. And for me, I was just like, almost in my head, I did this kind of like welcome home uncle type situation. I was like, thank you for speaking about this type of stuff on some greasy 140 BPM rhythms, because people need to hear that, you know, people need to hear that it can be done, number one, and for anyone who's tuning in, can see that actually there's complexity in the male experience and the black male experience. And I was quite disappointed to listen to and read some of the reviews where they were just like being like, oh, my man's soft. It's like, you're telling me you're bad all the time. Come on, do you know what I'm saying? Like, let's be really, really real out here about the relationships we're forming with the women in our lives, about the relationships we're forming with each other as well. People like Jay Husson at Daily Duppy Freestyle, first line he says is, deal with the pain, don't say nothing. What? Do you know what I mean? I remember watching that for the first time, me and my boy Cali, we was just like, thank God, like he's arrived. Do you know what I'm saying? Like my guy is actually stepping forward, and I know numerous people have done it before, but I think maybe I started to be in a space in my life where I was starting to actually really tune into that stuff, and it was resonating with me. Do you know what I'm saying? And it's those kind of narratives and those kind of agendas that I look forward to Grime being able to produce, reproduce, and represent more and more as it continues to grow and evolve. But with it, like we can't just have them man be responsible. Do you know what I'm saying? We got to take up space, and that's part of it. Like a lot of my work comes out of what I try to do in my projects is similar to what you do, what you've done with Mandem, in fact, is create a platform and then just populate it a little bit and then give people the space to grow into that platform and see what elements of themselves they choose to put forward. And then, depending on the context of the specificities of the project, manipulate it a little bit so we can dive into some of those deeper, less spoken about things, because the problem black men have is they haven't had enough space to do that, so we don't have the language, effectively, to tell people how we actually feel, because we hardly ever get a chance to do it, because a head nod or eye contact, you don't know where you're set. You don't know if you're stood on a passer or a wonderful conversation. So much of the time, you just hold it until someone makes the first move. You don't know where they've come from, what they're carrying, so then you're kind of like victim to the capriciousness of whatever trauma that individual may be walking around with themselves. You see what I'm saying? So it's tricky work. It's tricky work, and I'm like so flattered to be up on a panel with people who I know can do that kind of stuff, do that kind of work, and have that kind of conversations. But it's like, man, like giving people just the space, sometimes just sat there quietly with eye contact, a nod, and a can lead to so much, you know what I'm saying? And that will start to seep and pervade into the music. Fingers crossed. You know what I mean?
I was going to touch on, like you were saying, accountability, like we need to like be held accountable for the things that we do and say. And in the music industry, especially in like the grime, drill type of culture, that type of, like sphere of music. So like I was talking to you about this the other day, Elias, on the phone. A lot of my friends, I know a lot of people obviously that do, that are in that trap culture, that lifestyle. They're out there, doing things I might not agree with, whatever, risking their freedom and, to make some money out of it. And I see a lot of the things that these lot buy and talk about and spend a lot of their time and efforts on is fashion. And, like high-end fashion, not, Nike, Adidas, Puma, I'm talking, Gucci, Louboutin, whatever. And they're all on these, high-end things and spending hundreds and hundreds of pounds on some ridiculous items, right? Like, hundreds of pounds on scarves and stuff. And that's fine if you can afford it, but I know that these guys are making their money through other means, risking their freedom to do that. So, and a thought crossed my mind when someone posted, there was this drill rapper recently that came out, I forgot his name, but he came out as gay. And I don't know, I don't remember his name.
Mr. Strange?
Mr. Strange, I think so, Mr. Strange. And he came out and, he come out and said he's gay, and he was on a talk show called the ZZ Mill Show online, and he was talking about how a lot of his friends cut him off. Like, when he found out he was gay, they cut him off, they don't want to speak to him. And he knew that the attitudes that they had would probably mean that would happen, but he told them anyway in the hope that they could look past the fact that he was gay for him, because he, cares about them, they care about him, whatever. They're good friends, they've been, been there for each other. But it wasn't so in this boy's case, and like, I was watching Next in Fashion with my girlfriend. I wasn't watching it,
Okay, own it, man. Own it. It's okay. Say it louder for the people in the back. Yeah. Say it louder. What were you watching with your girlfriend? Say it louder.
Yeah. Next in Fashion, right? Some like trash Netflix fashion show. And they brought, they had like they do these challenges, when people try to make some sort of like look of this different, every week they've got
You're selling me by the second.
Thing, whatever. And then, they have a special celebrity judge, and this guy comes on, and it's Tommy Hilfiger, right? And I'm looking at the way he is. I don't know if he's gay or not, but he come off as very like camp. You know what I mean? Like, and I know like a lot of the men in my community that are in this trap lifestyle. If they saw someone like that, or if one of their friends came out as gay, they'd be like, I'd cut him off. I would never speak to him again. I wouldn't, do you know what I mean? Like, I'd completely discard him from my life, right? But this is a genuine question now. Where does that end? Mm-hmm. Because you've got people willing to cut off friends, people that they, love and invested time and experiences with, like that, just because they're gay. But on the same, the same people are also out there risking their freedom, spending money on things that are designed and made and make money for homosexuals and the people that you hate so much, you know what I mean? That you're willing to cut off so much. You're actually going out of your way and risking your freedom to put money in their pocket. So now, where does it end? Now, that's a genuine question for a lot of men. Like, I ask a lot of my boys that, where does it end for you? Do you know what I mean? Because if I came out and told you I'm gay, you will never speak to me again. But you're going and putting money in gay man's pockets. So there's a big disconnect there, do you know what I mean?
Sure.
So how strong are your, like you said, where's the accountability? Mm-hmm. So when I see a lot of my friends come out with homophobic rhetoric now, it genuinely does anger me, when it actually angers me. It never did before, to be honest. Genuinely, I didn't care. It wasn't my fight, my struggle to fight. I genuinely didn't, I wasn't involved. But now it's like, wait, hold on. This disconnect is actually starting to affect where our energies are going. Why don't you spend that capital on, something that you supposedly should care about, a black-owned, young fashion designer that's really good at what he's doing. Put some money in his pocket, do you know what I mean? If that's what you really feel. But I don't know. That's just a thought that I had.
Yeah, that's a deep point still. I feel like when it comes to the situation of accountability, now, if you can formulate a sick, perfect metaphor like that for a scenario, then obviously that's just that little narrative you gave, that's an easily deliverable. Do you know what I mean? You'd be able to go, hopefully, I feel like genuinely with a story like that, you could change a lot of people's minds and their thought process just by giving them that. And I think those kind of things are important. So I'm definitely not taking away that method of communication, just to intellectualize something, put something forward. But I think one of the problems that I've seen over the course, because obviously the nature of grime has always had a negative element to it, so there's always been kickback, and there's always been a reason to be accountable for certain aspects within a tune. Like, oh, I like this thing, you play it around someone, suddenly you hear something else, you're like, oh, actually, that was a bit whatever. I think the issue that comes with this accountability is like one of a very personal nature, and like I'm going to speak directly to the finances then. So if somebody is getting roped into the negative aspects of grime, and the negative aspects that they're getting trapped into is the trapped nature of it, and it's based on the fact that they're in a financially insecure situation, then I think that it's just worth highlighting that those who have managed to get themselves into a financially beneficial situation, not using a trap, that their message will be heard a lot stronger. And, you know, grime has been around long enough where I feel like there's been people who've tried to make their whole system based around telling people what they're doing wrong. And that's literally all they have, like in terms of what they consider their skill set, in terms of what they think that they're bringing to the table. So again, like I'm saying, though identifying an issue and vocalizing it is something that we definitely need to do more. And the more uncomfortable it is for you to talk about something in particular, that's probably the thing that you should be doing even more. I still feel like that there's I mean, to be honest, where I'm coming from in this isn't really to do with grime, it's more to do with the tech space. So like where I've been looking into tech over the last 3 years, what I've seen is a lot of black people saying more black people need to get into tech, and then they don't do tech. And I feel like you make it seem harder than it actually is because you're not actually involved in it. Mm-hmm. So that then comes into a situation where, okay, you know, if you've got that person who's born in Peckham and they're in it, then they're going to be able to communicate a lot stronger. And that somebody who maybe wasn't born into that environment, who now wants to come in and have an opinion of how people act, it's not that that's incorrect, but you saying somebody shouldn't do something isn't necessarily giving them the solution on how to do something. So if you want to address how people are maybe talking about women, but you're not in a relationship and don't actually have the skill sets to teach a young male, actually, this is the way that you should navigate this situation. Here's some tips. Or again, with the financial thing, or maybe it's a confidence thing, maybe it's an assertive thing. So again, I'm not saying that people shouldn't say what they consider correct at the time. I think, yeah, that story is just like a perfect scenario on how just having a narrative, you can open up somebody's perspective on the situation. But I also feel that there is a trap in people isolating their benefit in that, in highlighting what in some scenarios is kind of like the obvious truth. Because really, the magic is behind why is this so gravitating? Like, why do so many people go to particular MCs over other MCs, even though the narratives are similar? And I say that just in terms of actually trying to make some progression in these conversations that we have. Because, you know, even in scenarios like this, sometimes it feels like, are we singing to the choir? Do you know what I mean? Like, where are those real uncomfortable opportunities to be accountable in these situations? And I say that because I personally haven't really found the answer outside of every time I get an opportunity like this to just say whatever I'm actually thinking and to sit within the balance, you know, to be able to say, I actually love this tune, but it's actually mad and no one needs to be acting like that. Do you know what I mean? And within that balance, that's where I find my own personal thing, but I don't even really look at that answer like it's scalable. Do you know what I mean? So that this isn't for me to have a pinpoint. It's just to add that balance on there that, you know, there are some people actually in ends right now. They could be accountable for 10 seconds and change like 15 youths' lives. But then there's also some people out there who it's almost like, you know, it's like that negative side of charity when you're like, your actual whole business is like, if we actually did stop, what would you do? Do you know what I mean? Like, I kind of feel like you're thriving off our negativity, and I'm offended because I don't even feel like you come from the circumstance. Do you know what I mean? Like, I feel like you have a different place within this conversation, and actually, probably your accountability is more directed this way to the people who aren't in this scenario, and there's a whole host of other accountable issues, like you said, the bringing up of the record labels themselves, who are now portraying these different types of music. Because like I said at the beginning, when it came to the origins of grime, grime was a BPN, and there were all types of conversations that were going on, and there were all types of beats, because yeah, it came from garage, like a heavily feminine-based musical form. Do you know what I mean? Like, which was all about, you know, looking good, having a good time, and dancing expressively. Do you know what I mean? So when
love, a lot of it was about love as well.
Actual love, heartache, all of them things, like
breaking up with your girl, not being able to. There's a
They
remake
want
of that song in the charts now, isn't it? It was a white female like artist came out with the tune. It's worse than the original, like usual.
always, isn't it? Yeah,
But man, what was it, man? Tell me it's real or something. I don't know, man. KCI,
Did anyone get that?
Yeah,
I didn't come here to sing, innit? But like,
yeah.
bangers. But like, yeah. But like, sorry, I just wanted to say that just because, like, you know what I mean.
No,
A
that's-
lot of them wouldn't be
Just
able to make
interject
tunes
as
about
well.
love.
Yeah, no.
Yeah, I realise we've been waffling for a long time now, so if you have any questions from the floor, please do raise your hands. Okay, we've got quite a few. This is good. This is very good.
Do the tape.
Good question. Should we start? Let's go 1, 2 for now. Just because they're closer and we can see them.
Thank you very much for the panel. It's been really interesting. I just wondered if you could talk a little bit more about grime and the gender dynamics. So obviously grime is predominantly kind of black male space, but there have been women in the scene from the very beginning, and there are lots of women in the scene now, and there are also lots of queer folks in the scene right now. So I wondered, how has your experiences with grime been in relation to female MCs or female DJs? How does that impact your understanding of grime, or is it that you're mainly focused on the men in the scene?
Well, can I just say to start with that in this most recent clash that happened between Stormzy, Wiley, and Dot, that's the like most disappointed and detached that I felt from grime, based on the fact that I feel like the only loser was black women. Like somehow the whole thing, not even just black women, like their mums. And like you just know that this is a scene built on black mums raising their youths in a way where they're like, you know, use your talents, do your thing. So like, I just wanted to say that personally right now in terms of that, that's why like when I was coming into this talk, I wanted to know whether it's like, are we talking about this like the UK music or grime? Because yeah, I've always kind of backed it to the end, but at this moment in time, I feel like there is a very specific and very blatant disservice done to black women specifically. So personally, when I came up, there were always black female MCs. They always held out their own way as well sexually. So just as sexuals as the males would be, they would be just as sexual. So like I didn't ever really see like the barriers in that particular sense. But I also feel like there's no way to see like the last set of antics and say like there wasn't a loss, because the way those tunes went down, I was literally waiting for like a public announcement afterwards to be like, no, I actually love his mum, sorry, this was all a little bit mad, and it never came. So yeah, that's kind of how I feel about it.
I think, to be honest, when I see like women MCs and like women artists come about and they go hard on a beat, I'm more taken away by it. I'm more like excited by it. Like there was that Lady the Show video that went viral like a few years ago. I absolutely loved that. One of my boys used to wake up every day at uni and run that tune, yeah. And literally, it annoyed me so much. But it's funny because like he wasn't even really a big like grime enthusiast. He wasn't really big on that scene. It was more about the American like scene, and he didn't really like the UK thing. So like, I think that spoke to him more. Do you know what I mean? Like coming from a woman's mouth, and it wasn't necessarily. It clearly had nothing to do with the fact that she was a woman. Obviously, saying that, yeah, art is art. Do you know what I mean? So whether it comes out of man, woman, gay woman, doesn't matter. Do you know what I mean? It's art, and it's an art form, and it's also subjective. So, personally, do you know what I mean? Men spitting bars. There's a certain, like maybe just because I relate to it more, I listen out for it more. But at the same time, The Miseducation of Lauryn Hill is one of my best albums. Do you know what I mean? One of my favorite albums. So, do you know what I mean? So like it is what it is. Like, do you know what I mean? Like, yeah, I don't know. there's obviously space for everyone in the scene. Do you know what I mean? It doesn't matter who you are, what you look like. There's space for everyone in the scene. At the end of the day, it's art form expressing what you're coming at, like where you're coming from and how you're feeling. So, yeah, I don't see why that should make any difference.
Cool, thank you. Can we get another question from this gentleman here with the hat on?
Hi. That's loud. So I just wanted to touch on something you guys brushed over in terms of accountability. So I feel that is, in terms of grime and urban music and black people as a culture.
I quickly say shout out Wales.
Oh,
I was trying to place the accent. I was trying to place
I
it.
thought I was hiding it. Well, clearly not.
You failed. You failed.
I feel like it's something that everyone just brushes over and doesn't take seriously enough about accountability. So not to dig at any of you guys, because you have said at the beginning you were like you weren't in that life, you haven't been a part of the things that these grime artists say or drill artists say. But I feel like we need to be accountable for just sitting there and being like, hey, I do not know enough about this. I cannot comment on these things. So something that touched me that you said about not knowing whether these people were really doing what they were doing. The great thing about grime and urban music for black people is it's been a gateway out of the things that they were doing. Me personally, I'm lucky enough to not be in that anymore, but being as an accountability thing, I find rhetoric when people would say, do you know what, they're not even doing what they're doing, or for example, say we have our drug dealer friends or etc., or people that are doing things that they shouldn't be, going towards them and saying, oh, you shouldn't be doing that. Now, me personally, I've never known anyone that's in it that wants to be in it. Do you know what I mean? Like, there's no one that you can speak to that would be like, yo, man, yeah. They might say it to you, but on a real, no one wants to be sitting in a car looking behind them 24/7 just because they're risking their freedom for all this. So in terms of accountability and talking about that, how important do you guys feel that it is that us as individuals go and research and create conversations, have these conversations like we're doing right now? Do you think that it's something that we all need to work on as black individuals? Especially, you said earlier when you were talking about your friend that was cut, or talking to your friend, and he said he'd cut out people if they were gay, if they came out gay. How important is it then that we then turn around and say, yo, that's not the correct behavior? And I also feel that's a direct correlation with masculinity. We're often scared to just be like...
Definitely. I feel like, to be honest, for me, those conversations, like talking to my friends, for example, that say that, you know, I'd cut him off if he was gay, having those difficult conversations for me, as black men, is the things that we need to do to kind of understand a little bit more and, you know, understand what we're having accountability for too. Do you know what I mean? Like, there's no, like, if you like fashion, for example, there's no problem with that. You know what I mean? And that's great. But as long as you understand, right, that if you're, you know, wearing all of this Gucci and wearing all of this Prada and stuff, that is, you know what I mean, that means something, and that has a status. And as long as they understand that, and they maybe think twice next time when they have, like, you know, a homophobic thought, or like, you know what I mean, want to cut somebody off because they're gay. Like, maybe they'll think about that next time, or maybe they'll think about buying the thing if they feel that strongly that they still want to continue being homophobic. Maybe they'll actually think about, you know what, maybe I'm not going to spend my money there, for example. But as long as people think about it and understand what they like, why they feel what they feel, and they hold accountability for it, I think that's the most important thing. And having these difficult conversations is the only way that we're ever going to, like, you know, bridge these gaps and try and rid our culture and our understanding of these negative kind of curses that have been put on them throughout, like, many generations of probably lack of understanding and, you know, misinterpretation. So.
Yeah, and I'll just say as well that I think, I don't know, instinctually I want to say as well, we've got to be careful a little bit as well with, like, placing the responsibility on black people to, like, you know, cover like all of the angles of black culture as well, because it's like, it's not as if, like, you know, music by white artists doesn't include, like, violence and misogyny as well. So I think perhaps there's a more kind of societal conversation that all of us can have together about these things as well, and it isn't necessarily just like, right, black men need to call out the badness in grime. It's kind of like a bit more of a collective thing, but that's just my 2 cents. A couple more questions at the back. Shall we go with the woman closest to you, Chloe?
Pick someone on that side as well.
Okay.
Good evening.
Keep it even.
No, leave the right side. It's a bit dodgy.
Good evening, gentlemen. First of all, I just want to say big up your bad selves for everything that you're doing. And the second point I wanted to make was basically an ad-lib from the Birthday Boy in regards to the Skepta album. And I wanted to bring up Skepta again, but from his first album, Konnichiwa, and he's got an interlude of Chip, and he's having a struggle, and you know, he's talking about not being black enough for the being too black for the industry, but not black enough for the Mandem. So, and you know, Chip's boosting him up, and for me on that album, I thought it was a really beautiful moment. And in regards to talking about vulnerability from my guy and his pig farmer, I just wanted to ask you guys, where is the space for vulnerability not to be criticized? You know, like, obviously we're talking about masculinity, but masculinity, I mean, just because you are being vulnerable doesn't mean you're weak. And also, like, expressing your emotions doesn't mean you're also queer. And these connotations are always linked to it. And I wanted to know your thoughts.
Well,
We let Will respond to that.
oh yeah,
So-
please do.
I just, big ups, man. That interlude is just like, what powers, man. We flipped
Powers,
everything
innit?
upside down. Do you know what I mean? And so just listening to you speak just reminded me about the title of this thing, Deconstructing Grime, Race and Masculinity. We're finally at a point, given all of the conditioning we've had as a society and all of the history we've absorbed through education and through word of mouth and narrative and story, that we're actually beginning to open up platforms to unpick the like systems that have been put in place to create this patriarchal system. And through examples like that, where individuals actually put themselves forward and express that kind of vulnerability, it's beginning to give people gateways to do so. Just to tag on to what Elias said though, the important thing about trying to unpack and unpick and deconstruct thousands of years of conditioning is that it leads to conversations where you ultimately can see what's wrong, but you can't quite see the pathway to creating the right thing. And in that I think that's one of the most beautiful things about being vulnerable, because it gives you a space to like sit down, process, and then create effectively like a new form of understanding, a new set of meanings to words that have been weaponized in the past to keep, for example, women out of grime, or keep women in a position of being subjects of grime as opposed to being participants in it themselves. So that's all I've got in answer to that question so far.
And I just want to add quickly, in terms of like the space itself, obviously by definition, to be vulnerable is never going to just be safe. Like, that's the point, you're putting yourself into an unsafe scenario. And I think with that in mind, like as an individual, what you can really look to is actually, how do you treat your enemies? How do you treat somebody that you've fallen out of favor with? When you're about to insult somebody, what is it that you use for an insult to be able to do that? Because obviously the people around you are the ones that you're always going to try and kind of, you're going to try and bolster them up. But then when that young person's next to you and then you decide to use an insult to that person, which uses some act of femininity as something that is to be disregarded, that's where it's still going to transfer over. So as an individual, when you're vulnerable, it's always going to have a layer of being not safe. But the question is it your masculinity that's in question every time you're invulnerable? Is it, is it your whole being and personality that's in question?
Cool, thank you. Let's take one more question from the right side, and then maybe we'll wrap it up a little bit, because it's a bit hot in here. I don't want corona to spread.
Yeah.
Are you even right?
Sorry, but
Do
sorry.
that, like, we're going to hold like the whole thing without any corona like nonsense.
I had to make one joke.
I'd just like to say thanks. And my question is, do you think black people are pigeonholed in the media? Like, you have to either be, well, I mean, that's what, I'm not going to add anything, actually. I'll just let you answer. Do you think black people are pigeonholed, and how did that make you feel growing up, if you do think that's the case? Maybe with, like, Raheem Sterling as the answer, like, example, I guess.
That's powerful. So I'm going to come more from, because I love, hopefully, give something that we can all take away. And I'm going to bring Goffman and Freud into this, where life is like a stage, literally, right now. You are only seeing one perception of us right now. We are going to act different when we're around our boys. We're going to act different when we're around our girl. And what we need to understand is when this kind of torch is shone upon us, e.g. yourselves, we will act a certain type of way because we know someone's watching. And we will live up to whatever preconceived notions that we have, that we think will appeal to everyone in this room. And so where I'm going to come from this, from my geeky little brain, is that there's power in being alone. I don't think any of us spend enough time being alone. And in fact, we actually kind of coin being alone as a negative thing. And don't get me wrong, there's studies that have shown that we are happier in groups, that's how we survive. But we do need to spend more time alone, because that's when you're going to realize, who really am I? What are my real dislikes? What are my real likes? And when you spend time alone by yourself, you realize there's very few times that you can say everything in your life is good. Probably on one hand, maybe 3 moments in my life I've said everything is good. And then of course straight away something goes bad, right? But I would argue everyone, can I swear? I'm about to swear. Everyone's got their own shit that they're dealing with right now. Okay, but it is, right? Look, I've been in London for 2 weeks. I don't know if I can do that shit here.
Oh, man.
Because we got, like, hopefully it's child-friendly here. I don't know what type of audience we got here, right? So, ultimately, everyone cares about them. The universe revolves around you. Anyone that said the world doesn't revolve around you was lying. The world does revolve around you. We do things because we want to. And so to answer your question, do we feel pigeonholed? At times, we all live up to some sort of stereotype. We all live up to some sort of social norm, right? The fact that I even had to ask, can I swear? You know, is me living up to some sort of socially approved norm. And so, what, you know, I'm coming back to, which I hope everyone tonight does do, of course, in context, is spend some time alone. You know, schedule some time with your thoughts, and that it's okay to be down, and we won't go woo-woo. But you don't always need a reason to feel down, you know, but explore your thoughts, whether that's meditation, whether that's talking with someone, or having conversations like this, to realize, oh wow, I'm not the only one that thinks like that. So I hope that answered your question, at least from my perspective.
Cool, thank you. Yeah, so I know there's quite a few other questions, but you're more than welcome to come and ask any of the panel guests at the end as well. But yeah, I just want to say that I think this has been a really interesting discussion, and I know we're not always going to be able to provide all the answers to these things, but hopefully this little kind of format has provided a little bit of an insight into some of these important issues. And I want to say a massive thank you for all of you to coming through to these kind of things. So I know our attention spans are getting shorter by the day thanks to social media, so it's very much appreciated that you're willing to give your time to long-form discussions like this. Please will you all join me in applauding the panel.